You shared on LinkedIn, Tom, you said you will hear a lot of people tell you that AEO, answer engine optimization, is the same as search engine optimization. But as a great man once said, false. They are fundamentally different things, and the gap is widening. This is due to a mechanism called the query fan out. When you type a single query, it gets decomposed into multiple subqueries. Each of those surfaces entirely different sources, and the final answer is assembled from all those pieces, which means Google never searches for an answer to the query that you are tracking and producing content for. And here's the thing, most AEO strategy attempts to ram a new challenge into existing SEO frameworks. Find a query you want to rank for, write a piece of content for it, measure if it gets mentioned. But even if a user enters that exact query, Google isn't going to search for an answer to it. It's going to do research and compile an answer. You would need to rank for those subqueries, not the surface level one. The fan out queries are system generated and usually are not queries with any search traffic. And even if you could predict them, just think how much content you would need to produce to hit them all. So, on this episode of the show, we are talking about search engine optimization versus generative engine optimization. And I guess before we start, Tom, so you put that on LinkedIn. Could you introduce yourself? And then David, you've been on the show before, but for any new listeners, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself as well.
Also, yeah, Tom Redknight. I'm the founder and chief exec of a company called Demand Genius. We're an AI startup out of London, who spent the last two years or so in the kind of content marketing, AEO, GEO, whatever your acronym of choice is, world.
And I'm David Quaid, who's just regular SEO, plain old vanilla SEO.
David's been on the show before. David's been doing SEO for 2 decades, and you do a lot of SEO for SaaS. Yeah, and you're awesome. You're both awesome. So thank you. So Tom, could you talk about how AEO is fundamentally different? You think you wrote that to me over email. You said AEO is a very different challenge to SEO. They are incorrectly bundled together. AI very rarely actually searches for answers.
Yeah, and let me start off maybe by framing it in. I think there's overlap, and like between any two branches of marketing, right? There are certain things which are going to help you across the board. If you have high authority, if you have a strong brand, that helps you in absolutely everything you do. So there is, of course, some elements, and I would also say the two things are compatible. Like one thing I'm always keen, I'm not saying rip up your SEO strategy. SEO is still a fantastic channel. It just is a different channel with different mechanisms. So I see that like I sometimes feel like I get framed as if I'm attacking SEO, and that couldn't be further from the truth. But what I do think is really important is to approach the problem of AEO, GEO as a fresh problem. And I think quite naturally, it's been a problem that's been picked up by SEO leaders, SEO vendors, SEO agencies, and they've approached it through the framework of SEO and how can we create content that ranks in this new thing. And that just isn't really how AI models work. So I think there's two questions here. One is like, how should we approach it? And then how do they work under the hood? And that's the most fundamental finding. So we did a lot of, we do a lot of original research. I think I think it's a really important thing if you're going to operate in our space, right, as we try and understand this together. And we did this big study where we ran a whole load of prompts in awareness, consideration, conversion stage of the buyer journey. And what we got back was really, really interesting data as to how the responses vary at each point. And what it showed very clearly was AI does not really search. So in awareness stage, 0% of responses invoked retrieval, it cited any brand. Same was true in consideration. Only in conversion stage did it ever go looking for answers. Did it ever search, kind of in inverted commas for those who can't see my little hand diagram there. And that's really interesting. And even then, it was only 48% of the time. So that of all of the prompts that we ran, 16%, there was a search behavior. So that's the first level. It very, very rarely invokes retrieval. And then as we explained in the post, which I kind of maybe was a little bit more antagonistic than I needed to be because I wanted to shoehorn my Dwight Schrute quote in from The Office. But even when it does go to retrieval, and when it in that 16% where it does go searching, it doesn't search for what you are putting in. So all of the idea that you can optimize for that original prompt is in my opinion very heavily flawed.
Just quick question. The 3 stages. that you defined. How do you define those three stages before the last one? So like awareness, consideration, those are marketing terms, right? Not necessarily LLM protocols or how RAG works. So how would you define those prompts?
Yeah, well, what we were trying to mimic the behavior of users across complex buyer journeys, right? So is one of my I guess kind of things that didn't feel right about a lot of the AEO advice was it treats every prompt as an isolated event, whereas actually it carries a lot of context with it and it's part of a broader buyer journey. So often we look for like a lot of AO measurement focuses on the conversion prompts because that's where citations happen. So that's where we can prove impact. We wanted to try and simulate how a buyer prompts it at every stage of their journey from problem aware through to solution aware. So it wasn't, we weren't trying to emulate any kind of LLM behavior there. We were trying to emulate the user behavior, prompt the LLM in a way a user would at every stage of a complex buyer journey. And that's why we split it up into those three broad categories of awareness prompts, consideration prompts, and then conversion prompts.
So what was different about an awareness prompt that didn't result in a search? And what LLMs did you test this on as well? That'd be really interesting.
Yeah, so we were doing this in ChatGPT. So that would be one actually very interesting thing that we want to do as a follow up, and everything we published all of the methodology out there. So by all means, go and kind of reproduce it. But so I think it's fair to assume if that they all are the same basic technology. So if it was true in GPT, it's probably going to be true to at least some degree in the other ones. But that's an interesting question. And the other question was what varied between the different prompts. We would try to reflect, like, so awareness, you are asking much more open problem oriented questions, and then as you go through the funnel it becomes a lot more comparative and a lot more decision oriented. And the other thing that was actually really interesting was the extent to which the LLMs mirror back the language of the prompt. So there's a thing that happens called intent matching. So as you go down the funnel, the responses become a lot more decisional. And I think it's very tempting to think that that's because it really likes your brand. But actually, what we kind of saw is that's because it's really smart at helping the user. And it realizes as you give it a decision oriented prompt, you want help coming to a decision. So it gets a lot more firm. It goes looking for answers and then it gives you answers rather than exploration and comparison, which I found super interesting.
This method of marketing is so effective, I had to make sure it wasn't against Google's rules before I kept doing it. It's a form of SEO I call compact keywords. Whereas most SEO focuses on putting up articles to answer questions how, what, when, compact keywords focuses on putting up dozens of pages that sell to searchers who are actually looking to buy. These pages rank on Google and convert so much better than normal that when I discovered this years ago, I couldn't believe this was allowed. It's less work too. The average compact keywords page is only 415 words. Compact Keywords is a 13-hour deep course on getting sales with SEO. A customer recently said, "Each lesson is dense with information. You're giving years worth of experience boiled down into 15 to 30-minute lessons with no filler or fluff. I feel like I'm gaining a new superpower." Compact Keywords is about setting up an SEO funnel that brings you sales for years and years and years. It works with AI, it's less work than traditional SEO, and it makes way more money. You can get it now at compactkeywords.com. Back to the podcast.
I'm just trying to figure out why it was only at the conversion stage that it went to do a search. And by that, I expect you mean that the query fan out only happened then. So were you doing all of these prompts from the same user login? Were you?
Yeah, so we were running these via the API rather than in the UI, which always gets slightly different behavior, but it's very difficult to replicate the exact behavior that you get in the UI. But yeah, I mean, I couldn't answer why they were invoked differently, but it was a very clear trend across thousands of prompts. Like, and the fact that it was zero, it was pretty stark. And we did this across lots of different categories as well. So we picked 4 B2B categories with varying degrees of complexity. So some that are a little bit more commoditized. Because obviously for some categories, the bulk of the buyer journey is in the conversion stage, right? If you're buying toothpaste, it's all conversion. It's the offer at the point of conversion. But the more complex the category, the more bulk lives in awareness and consideration, which is where we were trying to understand the behavior in those stages better.
So would an awareness that category, would that be something like how do I brush my teeth, or do I need toothpaste, or would it be even higher? Like, how do I protect my teeth? Is that where that
Yeah.
is,
So,
or
yeah, so in the world of toothpaste, and that's why I say there isn't much awareness in toothpaste, right? I'm out of toothpaste. I buy new toothpaste. Like I hope that most adults at this stage know that they should be brushing their teeth. There's not like education that needs to go on there. But I like to use this a kind of way of thinking about it that I have, which is you can think of like take a CFO at a big company. There's like three purchases they might buy, and they're going to have varying degrees of complexity, right? So toothpaste. I'm out of toothpaste. What's the cheapest toothpaste is basically, and there's very little else at play there. Um, Trainers, my trainers are a bit old and I'm going to buy new trainers. There's a lot of decision making that actually happens along the way, right? Like, do I have back pain? Am I a runner or am I a climber? Am I a football player? There's all of these things that are going to go into that. And that's the awareness consideration. So, sorry, the awareness and consideration. So awareness is, how do I even know that my trainers, there's a problem with them? Well, maybe you start to realize I had foot injuries and then I realized that they weren't as protective anymore. And then consideration is, okay, well, which one would be protective? You then go to the extreme end of it with a billing platform, and you've got 13 different stakeholders, all at varying degrees of awareness that all of their problems come back to the billing platform. There's a huge amount of it that lives in awareness and consideration, and very little that lives in conversion. So my argument is the more complex the category, the less AEO is like SEO because it's not optimizing visibility at the point of conversion. It's actually influencing how the LLM understands the category and how it shapes requirements on behalf of the buyer.
'cause I would say, look, yeah, toothpaste. I mean, it's how much training does an LLM need on toothpaste? But I work a lot in SaaS, and actually billing is one of my favorite areas. So like metered billing, AI metered billing, that kind of stuff. Like I really
Mm-hmm.
love that. I'm really deep in there. So I imagine if I was going to start, I would imagine I would already know I need AI billing, right? Like I imagine if I was going to go to an LLM, I wouldn't ask it to explain it to me, or maybe I would, right? So maybe I would say, um, what is the AI billing? What options are there, or how would you evaluate the AI billing? I would imagine something like that would require a search, whereas like toothpaste, I can see that not requiring a search, right? But I would think if I anything more complicated than that, especially in B2B or SaaS, I would imagine that the searches would start pretty immediately, or higher up, like
Yeah, well, and that's kind of my point, I suppose, is that, yeah, that there is an awful lot more awareness and consideration that goes into the purchase, right? Like
right.
I don't know, take this podcast. It would take a long time for Edward for you to become aware that actually Descript isn't the right podcast platform for you, and then there's understanding why and what AI has changed in the podcast platform world that means that actually there's a better option out there now. At no point in that journey are you going and saying asking it for a specific recommendation,
Sure, sure.
and
Because
they're the
I often
conversations in which citations don't really happen.
Because I often joke with Edward and I say, the prompt is not the query. I actually have like a little Perplexity cartoon with Paul Atreides standing on top of a sand dune thinking to himself, the prompt is not the query, right? So I think that's where a lot of people get confused, especially in Gemini, right? So Gemini, because it's integrated with Google Search, and I guess I should have said AIOs, right, more than Gemini. But if you go to a normal Google search bar and let's say you type in a search for, let's just stay with best SaaS billing platforms, right? Um, the results that you get below the AIO are all the regular, that's the Google index for that query. And a lot of people, especially on Reddit or X, will say, "Oh, I can't figure out why I'm not visible," right? And so we see a lot of AEO experts, geo experts saying that geo is very different to search, right? The LLMs build trust models, something that I find very difficult to understand. But I definitely understand that the prompt is not the query. And I try to say that to people. And I think the best LLM for using that is Perplexity. ChatGPT often hides the fact that it's searching, I think, or it relies a lot more on caching. And I think Perplexity and Claude especially are more upfront about it, and the fact that you can see the QFO by looking at the stages. With ChatGPT and Gemini, you have to look behind the scenes, right? So whenever I dabble around with, ranking in Google, and then I want to go and see if I'm visible, I find that I can get into Grok, Perplexity much faster, Gemini slower, and then ChatGPT the slowest. ChatGPT seems to only refresh the results of its query fan outs much slower. I don't know if that's because it costs them more money because they have a lot more demand than say Perplexity or Claude, which I think still uses Brave Search, right? It stopped saying it uses Brave Search, but I can't find any updated information. So um, once once I find out what that query fan out is, I think it's relatively easy to sort of stay ranking in that. And it does differ, right? You go from place to place. And also with the makeup of the different result pages, depending on what's in the query fan out. Because the query fan out could be what, 3, 6, 9 different searches, depending on.
And are we talking here about because there's query fan out partly, which is like the LLM, the explainability of the LLM, right? And you can see Claude goes through it, and it's like doing this, doing this, doing this. But even for AI overviews, query fan out takes place, right? So
Yes.
it goes and it searches. I think my understanding is it's typically around 20, or it can be as many as 20 different things to fill its knowledge gaps that allow it to compile an answer. Which is where, so have you found in your work that you can predict what those 20 queries are? Because I think it's definitely going to be valuable if you're ranking for those, but I think it's so hard to predict that it becomes an unhelpful framework for AEO to try and do that. I think there are simpler routes, but
Yeah. So the number of queries tends to be 3, right? So the average query fan out is 3. It can also be 1, right? I could just say give me a list of the top SEO agencies in New York, and it'll be 1 query, top agencies in New York, or it might swap top for best, which in Google is very synonymous anyway, right? So you rank for top, you rank for best. It's pretty good, right? It'll also, consultant, expert, agency, when you combine with the word like SEO or PPC, tends to be very similar. I've only noticed that so if it queries out to 3, which is the most common I've seen, it tends to get 25 to 30 results back. And if you, in some cases, especially where I guess there's less agreement in the initial documents that come back, it can actually go up to 6 queries, which will net you maybe 50 results back. Obviously, a lot of documents will rank in the same subset. So it depends on how much the drift is, right? Um, so if you take, for example, SaaS billing, it'll do, and I think the grounding queries that come out after the first one, they're based on the results of the first set. It actually does it quite quickly because the way it types on the screen, it looks like it's still thinking, but it's actually already done that, because it's already gotten to the end of the document before it types it. So it kind of does that sort of delayed feedback, which I imagine slows the user down, saves on tokens. But I find it, once you know what the drift range is, it's quite predictable. So if you start with something like evaluate, or who are the top players in the SaaS billing market, depending on basically things that will impact that, maybe your own history, have you asked that question before, or does it know that you work at a SaaS billing platform, might or if you've asked questions about different vendors. And then depending on what the top results come back with, it might go and do something like add a year, for example. And so I see a lot of people, I don't know if you've noticed this on LinkedIn, for example, people talk about freshness a lot. And I found the Ahrefs report that came out with very interesting, when they said the average document was actually 500 days old. Found that correlated very well when I went to look at AI's Bing performance report, or sorry, yeah, Bing's AI performance report, sorry, where I see 2024 outweigh 2026 a lot. So I always assume that those years are there to throw SEOs off, or to undermine SEO, depending on which LLM you're working with. I don't know if you've noticed that much at all, or
not huge. Could you repeat the question? Or,
so
what?
I'm yeah. So what I'm trying to do is understand when the LLM does the search, right? And then
Yeah.
how the query fan out works, and then the predictability and reliability of appearing for those searches. I think it's pretty predictable. I think where it gets kind of difficult is where you, for example, get multiple listicles back and it's trying to
Mhm.
compile a list of top 5, top 10. Then it becomes very unpredictable. But for the most part, I find that the visibility in Google search and the visibility in AI seems to be pretty consistent, right? Like at the end of the day, it's Google or Google clone running the query, whether the query is the first, the second, or the third, right? It's not the prompt, as you said at the start. It's you're in SEO, you're usually optimizing for one query. Now you're optimizing for one query plus potentially drifts, right? And I find as long as you get in for the first query, you're pretty much set, right? Do you see something different with that, with the other?
No, so I do. We do see that a relative amount of consistency, but I think to me that goes back to the like at the end of the day, a lot of this does. So what SEO or search and AI do have in common is that they index very heavily on authority, and we know that AI in particular treats that as a huge. I tend to think you've got three ways to influence an LLM. You have your positioning, your content, and your reputation. So positioning is who you say you are. Content is what you consistently put out there that kind of reinforces that, and then reputation is what other people say you are, and how people validate that. And one thing we know is that at the moment, reputation is very heavily indexed. So that's the kind of brand authority and things like that. So we see it in that extent. And that would be my hypothesis as to what creates that similarity. But it's the same as saying, like, okay, word of mouth and search is going to have similar visibility because they are built on the same brand foundation, right? What gets you word of mouth, what gets you search visibility, what gets you AI visibility is ultimately, are you good and do you communicate that and do people agree? So that's what I would credit the kind of the relative convergence of those two things to. But it's interesting, and what I think what I haven't come across before is I'd be interested to dig more into the explainability of the query fan out process because my general understanding, and you would understand like search a lot better than I would. My general understanding is that that is a bit of a black box. I think the other thing is coming on to like what's a helpful approach to optimization, but that's interesting, and I'd love to see like the data around that.
Yeah,
Uh,
so you another topic I see brought up quite a lot that I think is confusing for brands and users is that LLMs have their own indexes, whereas I would say they don't, right? Like they building a search index. I think Google's done a terrific job of making that look simple. Bing have done a terrible job of replicating them, right? That's why I think they've struggled. Sort of like the old Microsoft versus Apple problem, right? Where Google's this massive monopoly. But I don't see like especially Perplexity doesn't have its own index. It's a wrapper of an LLM. Gemini obviously uses Google's index. ChatGPT seems to use Google's index, especially if you look at maps, right? It's not even a secret. It's like the URLs are straight from Google. It hasn't found a way of masking it. So when you say the two rely on brand trust, in search, I think that's a difficult problem, right? Because I think search is built for so much more than just like marketing. It's built for facts and information and discovery and news and a whole lot of other things. And so authority in Google is really like it's very simple. It's a number and a topic, right? And it really just comes from who links to you and who they are and what value that carries, and then how you've performed for that search phrase in that search index. For example, I know Grok pretends that it has its own search index, but uh, I can publish something today. Like, for example, I often love playing with like who are the top SEO experts or the top geo experts or the top EAT experts. And I just do that because it's easy, right? Like I have a lot of topical authority in Google for SEO, right? So I'm not going to go and do travel or something like that because it's just going to take forever to catch up. So I often like throwing people that are friends of mine on X or friends of mine on Reddit and putting their names into the list just to watch it change, right? I've thrown Edward in there a few
I was
times
about to
just
ask,
for fun.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
what does it say
Um,
about Edward? Come on.
and so what's interesting is that the results that Grok uses exactly match Google's. Like it's 1-to-1, the same as Perplexity does. And ChatGPT is very close. I mean, when I say very close, it's 100%, right? Um,
I think
So
that's still sorry.
sorry. My question to you was: do you think that ChatGPT uses Google or has its own index?
I wouldn't be qualified to answer which index it is. Like, I think you have to be a ChatGPT in order to do that. But I think the challenge is like, we're still, as long as we're thinking about what index it uses, we're looking at a tiny microcosm of the prompts that um, influence what brand someone ends up choosing or what product someone ends up choosing, right? And I think that's where I'm like, so most of the overlap between AEO and SEO sits in that 16% of searches where AI actually searches. I couldn't tell you what index they're using to search. I don't think it's hugely important, because I think my argument is that the other 84% is actually where influence happens and actually where AEO strategy needs to focus. I think the challenge is there are, I think AEO and SEO are very, very compatible as two different things. But taking an SEO like strategy for AEO, I think can be really, really damaging, for two reasons. One, I think it encourages you to look at all the wrong metrics out of it. So it encourages you to talk about ranking, it encourages you to talk about traffic. Those two things aren't really AI search concepts or AI concepts, right? Like, there isn't a concept of a ranking within an AI response. It's you could be the first one mentioned, but if it says you're rubbish, then that's not a lot of value, and it very rarely links to you, right? So if we say that 16% of prompts ever cite a brand, what percentage of them are then clicked to? So that's one of the narratives I always struggle with when people are like, oh, look at the proportion of traffic that comes from Google versus AI. It's like, well, yeah, well, Google is designed to link to you. So search is a directory. AI is not. It's like an active participant in the market. It's a thinking being that talks to your buyer as a consultant, and you need to influence it, not just be visible in it. So I think that's where, like, as long as everything is a question of visibility, I think it's very difficult to do AEO well. The other challenge you have is what we do see work really well for AEO is where you are able to communicate who you are, who you're for, what you're good at, what the trade-offs are of your product with a lot of consistency. And the way I think of it is those three pillars, right? Content, positioning, reputation. The closer those three things are to each other, the better, because you're creating no room for interpretation. You're really clear over those things. Now, the challenge is when you start trying to optimize for specific prompts in the way that you would optimize for keywords, because of all of this fan out process that we talked about, you end up creating so much content. And we're seeing a lot of people, or a lot of the, I guess, the kind of what I would call black hat AEO type tactics that I see is where people think, okay, I need to create loads and loads of content. Well, here's AI. I can create loads and loads of content, and I can repurpose this one article to cover the 20 query fan outs and the 22,500 different variations of prompts that exist for every keyword. And what you end up with is this massive library. And we talk a lot about like content debt, which is basically the gap between who you are today and what some of your content says you are, because it's all outdated: currency, quality, consistency, clarity. The more content you produce, the harder it is to provide clarity as to who you are and to maintain that. And that's where, like, playing the whack-a-mole game with trying to rank for all of these queries, I think I see people who that has really started to damage. Now, I think that maybe it's fair to say like bad SEO is incompatible with AEO, good SEO is very compatible.
Yeah, I can understand that. I guess the way I would look at sort of like geo and I do totally accept that, you know, using words like rank, right? I've spent 26 years of using the word
Yeah.
rank, and um, I haven't got used to saying cited yet. And so the way I look at it is sort of like, let's say I need to be in the top 10 SEOs to follow on Reddit, for example, or top 10 blogs. So I think actually one of the ones I got up for Edward was like top YouTube SEO podcasts, right? And the way I would go about breaking out how I'd get visible is I would put in the prompt, or I'd put in the basic keywords of the prompt, right? Because I imagine the prompt could get, you know, very personal or get very spurious, like, hey, I'm really want to know more about SEO. Who are some of the top SEO podcasts I should be following? And I would imagine that the query fan out takes away a lot of like who I am and background stuff and just breaks it down to a query. That query, I think, largely gets sent to Google regardless, except for Claude and Brave Search. But I think for Grok, ChatGPT, Perplexity, and Gemini. So that's why I think SEO is so important, because if we're not in that top 10 result coming back from Google, then we're not going to be included in the synthesized results. So if I want to get, so what I often do is I look at the SERP result or the the synthesized result. So if I started with like, who are the top SEO blogs I should follow, it would come back with like Google's blog, Ahrefs blog, SEMrush, the usual typical big brands. And I normally put a screenshot of that on X and I say, okay, look, this is what I'm going to try and hack next. And then I'll go and write a blog post. Hey, who are the top YouTube SEO podcasts you should follow in 2026, for example? And then I'll just maybe I'll copy and paste a list, or I'll just make up my own list and I'll put myself in, I'll put Ed in. And then once it gets indexed by Google, when I rerun that prompt, the results of the query fan out change. And if I'm in that top 10, suddenly the list of recommended brands changes and it shifts completely. And suddenly I see myself, or I'll see Ed, or I'll see, whoever else being added to that list. And then I can repeat that process. And then I can look at the subqueries, or I can come back and check another day, or I can check another LLM and see if they modify it. So like, instead of saying best SEO podcast, they might say like best SEO channels on YouTube. And then I'll have to decide in Google, is channel and podcast synonymous? And if it is, I can keep it, or I can add a H2, and I don't necessarily have to build out more content. However, if it treats us semantically different, then I might have to either alter the page title so I could also rank for that. And then as long as I can consistently come up in the 10 results or top 20 results that are included in the synthesis, then I can effectively insert my brand into that conversation.
I think the challenge. Are you not still selecting quite a thin sample of queries, and then you're optimizing for those? But I guess so. Maybe you should say one of the bits of napkin math that I've done is when you take like a keyword and then look at how many different prompts that can produce, right? So a keyword, it's short, it forces the user to kind of consolidate their intent into a short string. And therefore, in order to track prompts, we kind of do the same, and we kind of condense a prompt into a keyword because then we can track it. But when you actually look at how users prompt, it's paragraphs, right? They add criteria, they add their job role, their understanding of their persona. It carries 6 months of config beforehand. So when you kind of look at how that can translate, like one keyword can become 22,500 different prompts. Now, I think one of the challenges is, I don't doubt that, particularly where retrieval is being invoked, you can find 10 of those which reflect a particular language set and kind of hack those, right? Optimize for those. But the challenge is you don't understand the knock-on effect that you're having on the other 20, can't do my maths, 2,490 or whatever the right number is. And I think that's where there's a lot of, and it's going to vary. Sometimes that will be a problem. Sometimes it won't, right? Sometimes that'll all reflect that. But there's a lot of risks that you optimize for this fine set of prompts that you've selected. And what you miss is what's happening across all of the other ones, plus what's happening when retrieval didn't get invoked in the first place.
Yes, I think I come at it from the other side, right? I look at a series of prompts, and they effectively break down to the same query, right? So, for example, if I'm asking about the top 10 SEO agencies in New York, I'm going to get SEO in New York. Sometimes, like if I've been chatting and I start talking about SEO and geo, or SEO and AI SEO, for example, it might add geo to the fan out, right? But essentially, whether I ask for the top 10 SEO experts or the top 15 SEO consultants, or they all come down to the same query. So like you said, there could be 2,000 different prompts with one keyword. So if I'm not trying to rank for the prompt, I'm trying to rank for the keyword or the key phrase that is underpinning all of those. So like you said, even though the user has a lot of history, or they've a very long flowery prompt, like I have an organization of 50 people, and I'm looking for the best invoicing software, right? So if I've got 50 people, what's the best invoicing software? I'll see that it does a very lazy search, and it'll do like best invoicing software platforms, and then it'll do another search for like best invoicing software for 50 people or for an SME or something like that. And I find that because not a lot of content exists for that, because not a lot of people write that way, it either comes back to the same results or just being found for the primary query is actually enough. And so I don't have to worry about all of the other things that match that sort of like the larger text of the prompt, if that makes sense. Like basically, if you take 200 people trying to ask the same question about SaaS billing software, at the end of the day, it has to get a list back from Google for the top 10 SaaS billing applications, right? And it does have like an interesting impact because like one of the things I noticed, and I've said this a lot on X, is that if I say, for example, I want to know who are the top 10 SEOs to follow on Reddit, it doesn't sort of like go to Reddit. And a lot of geo agency owners talk about, it uses Reddit to trust or it cites Reddit out of trust. And I find that interesting because it's not like it's agentically going to Reddit and going through all of the forums and adding up all of the top votes or who gets mentioned the most. If you ask it for like who are the top SEOs to follow on Reddit, the query fan out to Google is literally top SEOs to follow on Reddit, and the top 10 results might only include two from Reddit, and then three might be a blog post, and then two might be a Quora entry, right? So, and then some of those SEOs might not even be on Reddit. Like, for example, some of the SEOs recommended to follow the most might be John Mueller or Barry Schwartz, not very active on Reddit. Or if there's actually a subreddit, thread on Reddit, like top SEOs to follow, it'll bring that back and then it'll just count the users that are listed in that thread and say, here are the top users. And then I find if I know what that query is and I can then either post a new thread or write a new blog post and rank for it, I can then change the constituent names. Because like you said, the LLMs definitely don't seem to be doing any research about it, right? They just sort of like take those pages back from the index and take them at face value,
I
which I
think
think Lily
that's
Ray talks about a lot.
I think that's the bit that I would push back on a little bit is that because so I think there's one thing that we definitely agree on, and I can see that when I think what a lot of this comes back to actually is how material the criteria. So when you talk about okay, a more complex prompt, are the criteria that are put into that complex prompt material to the answer? So to take that example potentially of okay, the best SEO consultants, you can add flowers around it, but if the flowers aren't really meaty things that change who the best SEO consultant is, then it's not going to meaningfully change the answer. And I do come at a lot of, we specialize in doing this for B2B brands specifically. More complex the sales cycle, the more messy, more kind of invisible, the more that we get interested, I guess. So that's probably a caveat that's worth applying to everything I say. But when the criteria are meaningful, I'm looking for a bidding solution. I'm the CFO at a 50-person company. This is our tech stack. This is really important to me. I need to get my CMO on board. All of this stuff that comes into it, then it is going to really make an impact, right? You can see it very clearly. Different lists come back, so to speak, if it was a list. So that I think is where there's an element of agreement. The thing I don't fully agree with though is the idea that okay, it needs to get a list back from Google. I mean that's not the way that an LLM works. They understand. They typically rely on their own ingrained knowledge, right? They form an understanding of the relationship between lots of different entities, and wherever possible, they are answering based on that. So they're not a kind of personal agent that takes your query and says, "Let me go find an answer for you." And I think that's where maybe the difference lies most of the time. And from our data, really, whenever they can get away with it, they are going to answer based on what they know. They're going to explore freely, and that's why lots of mistakes come in if you're not clear and things like that. So that's the behavior that I think I don't agree with, I suppose.
Right, because so I think at the start, and I often joke that some of the different stumbling blocks that have befallen OpenAI, right? I think one of the worst things to happen to them is they got handcuffed to Microsoft's legal team, right? That saw them, Google beat them to the race with some acquisitions and so on. And I think also that Bing is just such a terrible Google clone. And I see a lot of people talking about, AI establishing its own entity and its its own understanding of relationships, and to sort of like test that hypothesis, what I've done is done the initial prompt, right? So, hey, who are the top SEO agencies? Who are the top fintechs? Who are the top banks for startups? Who are the top VPN replacements, CTNA replacements, whatever, all of the different things that I work in. And where we're not visible, if we go and publish something, get into Google, then we're visible within minutes in most of the LLMs, with ChatGPT being the slowest, right? So if I published a blog post today, and I don't have the world's biggest blog, I'm sort of like a single consultant. I write like, I have time for maybe like 6 or 7 posts a week type thing. And if I write a blog post now at say 5 o'clock Eastern, and I'll go off for dinner and I'll come back at 6 o'clock, if I'm in that top 10, then Grok, Perplexity, will definitely quote me. So it's a bit difficult to see how they've got a pre-established understanding of all the brands from training if I can enter the synthesis today, right? Like in an hour or in 10 minutes in some cases, right?
That's you can influence it very quickly when it invokes retrieval. But I think
Yes,
we
yeah.
keep coming back to just these very like narrow prompts, which is like best SEO consultant or something like that, right?
Mm.
And then it goes and it validates and it looks for answers to that. So that's the conversion stage. But I guess our point is it's not a funnel, it's an iceberg, right? That is the tip of the iceberg. So if you're looking at just optimizing visibility at the point of conversion in a complex category, you are missing, well, actually 84% of the opportunity that AEO presents. Because what's going to have a bigger impact, a marginal gain in visibility on a bottom of funnel query, or actually impacting the way that the LLM and through high information gain content, things like that, less hacky roots, but more research, quality stuff that changes the way that they understand your category as well as your brand, what you're good at and bad at, and therefore they funnel more users. Because that, bear in mind, that bottom of funnel query that someone put in is no longer an isolated event. It's the product of 6 months of conversation with the LLM. So how do we know? Why do they put in best SEO consultant versus best GEO consultant versus AEO consultant? Well, that's because of all the work that you've done previously to try and get the AI to shovel them in your direction. And that's the real opportunity, is using it to influence your category and position your brand within that. I always say in such a way as makes visibility inevitable. Take Demand Genius, where we've talked about our kind of dark AI is what we call this piece of research for. We would love that to become embedded in the LLM's understanding of the AAO category, that this thing exists called dark AI. That's going to help us so much more than being on the proverbial front page, right? Because then suddenly people are like, how can I track dark AI? And well, then we're obvious. So that's where I think, particularly in complex categories, the opportunity at the moment is being missed. And it's just a very different opportunity that requires a very different set of practices.
So how would you get into that sort of like data set or learning? And how often do the LLMs get trained on that?
So the training is infrequent and it varies model by model, and you are a bit more reliant on their updates. It's going to be interesting to see how that evolves, actually. That's where it comes back to like content, positioning, reputation. They're the three things at your disposal to try and influence it in terms of how they think about you. The other thing that I'm a huge, if I can invest in one thing, well, actually I can, and I do, it's information gain. If you are, so content, that the traditional like search and content playbook is you find a high volume or high intent query, you summarize knowledge against that query, and the best summary wins, right? That's search in quite a basic nutshell. That's not a very useful function in the world of AI, because I can go and get ChatGPT to summarize absolutely any piece of knowledge that we already have as humanity, for me on a one-to-one basis. What really makes you citable, and that's the thing I always encourage people to focus on, is don't worry about citations, worry about whether you're citable, is high information gain content, original research, surveys. We have a kind of 3-step framework, which is you have interpretive information gain, so a new slant on an existing topic, empirical information gain, so brand new data, original research, surveys, and conceptual information gain, which is kind of when that original research or data has led to something that genuinely moves understanding forward. Now, you can build a brand's positioning around conceptual information gain for 5 years, or you could probably now about 6 months. But so that's what we encourage people to do, is try and climb that ladder. And by doing that, you create justification. You don't just make yourself visible. You embed why you are the right choice into the very foundation of these models and how they understand your category.
So you're saying as part of a regular content strategy. So that's like basically, are you talking about content that you put on your website type thing?
Yeah, so that's what I think changing the focus of our energy away from the optimization hacks. And I don't mean that as kind of disparaging as it might sound, but
No, no,
the
no.
away from the optimization and towards the research, the groundwork that sits behind the content, and that will help throughout the funnel. Then you're then addressing every part of the iceberg, not just the tip of the iceberg.
I see information gain. It's a topic that's thrown around in SEO a lot. I see a lot of similarities in terms of like schema, information gain, EAT, and schema entity, which are in some cases 12-year-old concepts in SEO that have like resurfaced in AEO, and that's sort of often challenge people that just because Google has a patent for information gain, it owns the patent for information gain. I don't think it's a very usable patent because it would just lead to people adding more and more information, right? Like, how does an LLM know that the information is pertinent or accurate? I mean, Google, as we know, is like content agnostic. And so, what you're talking about then, wouldn't an LLM then need to have an almost sort of a database almost the same size as a Google if it's going to have all of that content from all of these companies, right? I don't see
It
the
doesn't.
difference in that.
Sorry, it doesn't take the content. So it doesn't have a database of all the content. It learns what it can from the content. It incorporates it into the training data. The content is the training data, right? It learns what it can from the content, incorporates it into its knowledge graph, its understanding of the world and the relationship between all the things in it. And then it does its best to answer out of that knowledge, and that's where things come up. So it'll associate Stripe with easy to use, good for startups, all of these different things, and only when it doesn't have much certainty there does it then go looking for knowledge. So I think that's it. It's not built to index content. It's not built to surface content. It's not a directory.
It sounds like, so I'm just trying to wrap my head around like how that content is different from the content that's surfaced in an index like Google's, right? Because maybe my understanding of LLMs is way too simplistic, where the training and heuristics that it learns in training is like, for example, Gemini is trained on Reddit, whereas, for example, the other LLMs don't actually have access to Reddit for their training. Is sort of like, how do I understand the vocabulary of humans? How do I understand concepts? How do I understand geography, things like that? Learns patterns and then applies that to essentially everything that has to be retrieved. So obviously you can sit and have a conversation with ChatGPT about your feelings, or maybe you've had a fight with your best friend, or perhaps you want to impress your boss. And of course, then you might have like you might trigger a prompt that then has to go and retrieve information. But I would have thought for anything like around SaaS or products or brands, outside, I can imagine the training for ChatGPT, including like who Coca-Cola is or Hoover, right? Or NASA, right? Because those are almost concepts of their own, right? They're so big. But I would imagine like any other non-Fortune 500 company or something that's not in the encyclopedia would have to be retrieved. I mean, do you know what level of scale
They have
would be between?
a pretty broad knowledge, right? So we're a startup that didn't take long for you could tell me about Demand Genius. You can still do it, and it has the false associations. Actually, it's deeply ironic and embarrassing. But it has a pretty broad knowledge. The best way I can describe it, like, because I think you made a good example there of like how humans understand stuff. We build up all of these knowledge in a broadly similar way, and that's what LLMs are designed to do. They're designed not to index information, but to accrue knowledge. But we can't go back and cite where we got it all from. We can when it's meaningful, when it's really interesting. It's like, oh, I read this really cool thing a couple of weeks ago. And then the citation becomes relevant and we might mention it. When we want to be really credible and really certain, we're going to go and seek out the citation because we know that, okay, it's like when you're kind of answering from maybe like, oh, I'm pretty sure, don't quote me on this. That's what LLMs are kind of doing at the top of the, crudely speaking, in awareness stage. And then further down, they become a lot more, they go looking for the information to search for it. To improve their confidence. So I think that's a really good analogy for how they understand things. But that's where, for the vast majority, and this is what our research showed, and like 84% of the prompts we ran, that was what they were doing. It was talking from their ingrained understanding. And that's what's actually really hard to change. And that's where I come back to, like, where's the impact to be had? Take Demand Genius. Is it from being visible on those kind of bottom of funnel prompts, or is it actually correcting it so that when the CFO who's about to sign off on buying Demand Genius goes in and tell me about Demand Genius, I'll see that it says back the right thing, and it says fantastic value for money. It's great for CFOs like you. Go for it. And that's the more important thing. And particularly in anything complex, that's actually, I think, the most urgent thing for people to fix.
So
I feel like I've answered around your question there. So tell me if I've not answered it.
yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to get to is sort of the granularity of like what's in the ingrained and what does it have to go search for? Where does that split, right? Because if I go to, and like I said, I encourage people to use Perplexity more than ChatGPT. I think it's more of an honest agent in terms of like when it has to query fan out. For example, if I use Claude or Perplexity to do things like work out the pacing for my budget, right? Let's say I'm doing my paid search and I want to set up a campaign and I'm on the 23rd of April. If I'm spending, how much have I spent per day, and then how much am I on target to spend for the end of the quarter? While it has like some basic understanding, it'll actually go off and learn Python, and then it'll actually look up how to do the equation to calculate it. Now, if I ask it again later and I just change the numbers, it doesn't have to go and do that anymore because it's just gone and created out. But what level of going to brands? Because like essentially every brand out there, every company has its own website. So for this to be in their ingrained training, is there a certain number of websites that they're trained on, or is it the whole web? So you were saying, for example, if you ask it about a certain brand, it can rely, I think you said the top three, awareness, information, consideration stages. That's still a lot of websites, or a lot of information from a lot of websites to remember, right? It seems to be a huge amount of memory that doesn't seem, if you look at what if you look at what an LLM has to learn in terms of its heuristics, right? So if Gemini is trained on Reddit, it's got information about people talking about going to college, what a college is, how college works. Then you've got a list of all the colleges. Then you've got a list of all the courses that are in the colleges, and then you've got a list of, which is different to a list of courses that are generally available in colleges, right? So is it the list of courses? Is it a list of all of the colleges? I mean, I think there's 35,000 colleges in the US. And then if you add 580,000 small businesses, and then you add all of the businesses in the UK, for example, in Europe, eventually that just sounds like it's an entire copy of the entire web, or at least, and that compute power with what an LLM needs to remember, which is almost every sentence or pattern it's trained on, like what is a credit card? How does an ATM work, right? Those like functional questions, right? Like how do I engage with knowledge? And then having that knowledge built in, that's what I'm trying to work out. Where's the granularity between it? Because if I go to Perplexity and say, well, who are the top companies in SaaS? It seems to run a query fan out.
There's a really, really crucial difference there, though, because you said it yourself.
Okay.
Perplexity is not an LLM; it's a wrapper. So
It is, yeah.
ChatGPT is an LLM. You are talking to the model
Yes.
as if you're talking to another basically sentient being. It's AI, and that's where, like, yes, this is incomprehensibly cool and insane technology. But there's a crucial difference. Perplexity is an agent for research. It is an agent that acts as an intermediary, and that's why it's a lot more transparent. It does the research job for you. Perplexity is probably the only one actually that you could call an evolution of search. You had Yahoo, Google's algorithm got steadily better, and then Perplexity launched and it took it to another level because it's doing the search on your behalf. With ChatGPT, with Claude, it's not a search engine. You are talking to it. It has this knowledge. It has learned to map all of this knowledge, all of human knowledge, and it's done that by being trained on basically the whole of the internet. Up to a certain cutoff. And there was a point, like when ChatGPT first launched, it was quite interesting because it was like trained up to 2023. And so there were certain things that it just doesn't know that you really expect it to know. And that's why there's a whole lot of really interesting stuff going on in the media industry, which a bit of my background is in. They're all like, it's a huge problem there is how they protect their IP, because obviously ChatGPT, Claude, they all want to be indexing the latest news so that they remain up to date and they keep building all of that onto their knowledge graph. But that's their IP, so that's why there's a huge battle over that. They are hungry for knowledge and they just ingest more and more of it and map that into their overall understanding. It's difficult because it's two people who aren't data scientists talking about how AI works.
Yeah, so
But it's
I'm talking about I'm with Perplexity. I'm including you know Claude and Gemini as well, right? They're both trained on their own corpus. But to me, the training is like how to use language. What is a university? What is a university course? It's not like a list of all the colleges, a list of all of the courses that they have, because that's a ton of information that's always being changed. And so when I mean Perplexity seems to fan out, I don't mean that just because it's a wrapper. I mean, I assume that it's trained on an LLM that is similarly trained as Gemini, right? Because it has to be able to understand the same language. But let's take Gemini and Claude then. Again, if I ask it the same questions like, who are the top SaaS companies, or what is a SaaS company? So it probably doesn't have to query fan out for like what is a SaaS, but I would imagine once you get to any brands, that apart from the very top, like almost household names, I would imagine all of that has to be sent to RAG. Has to be retrieved.
yeah, so that's not the case. It when in every new training window, a whole load of new things come into its understanding. Now it has the more, again, I'm going to come back to those 3 points. The more data there is for it, the more they can use to pinpoint and get a really clear understanding of something. So if you have lots of content that positions you perfectly, it's very clear, it is very consistent, and it's backed up by your reputation, it has complete confidence, and it will go to see. I want to be careful. It appears that it will go to retrieval a lot less in that example. The less data there is, the less certainty it has. It appears to invoke retrieval a little bit more, but it also is wrong a lot more, right? So if you ask it about a very early startup, it'll often put it in like a startup that launched 3 months ago. It'll be like, don't know a lot about it. It seems to be in this category. And that's because it's kind of come into its awareness, but it's not built all of those associations. If you think about it as a kind of entity on a graph, there's lots of spokes coming off it, and it doesn't have all of the spokes yet. It's not mapped all of the strengths and weaknesses, but it kind of knows it exists, and it's out of London and it does this. So that's what your job is, to kind of train it and build the right associations.
But then how do you train it? I mean, how do you make sure that you're because you're saying things like knowledge graph and entities, but these are largely Google terms, right? Knowledge graph is Google's knowledge graph. So
Knowledge
are you
graph is a
saying then that
technology.
sure? So are you saying then that ChatGPT has to, like, how does it decide then? In the last training, it didn't include a website or a startup. How does it now decide to include that startup? How do you like? I mean, I would assume that the training, which I understand costs like quite a lot of money as well. I think it costs like a couple of billion to train an LLM. How do you get in front of that? How do you get yourself inserted into that corpus of training? Like, I know Gemini isn't trained on the whole web; it's trained on Reddit, and then it uses Google's index,
I
which is
wanna I wanna actually jump off this and switch into
sure,
like implementation. So like
sure.
to jump off what David was saying. So you're engaged. You get engaged by a brand. So then, what are like maybe you perform an audit. What are the action like? What does an audit look like if you do that? And then what actions do you take to increase visibility in LLMs? And then maybe we could have an interesting discussion around that.
Are we talking about demand genius here?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Okay. So, I mean, typically the first step of an engagement is kind of two things. The first is understand what AI thinks about them. So visibility is one component of that, right? And that's what most brands with a kind of SEO mindset will do is you agree on what's a good representative list of prompts that we do want to show up for, the tip of the iceberg. Obviously, you want to be visible there. And are we visible? We also try and help them understand, okay, what does the AI, and we have some pretty cool sentiment analysis models and things like that. What does the AI think of us? If we ask it about us, we ask it about our competitors relative to lots of different criteria that might be applied, ease of integration, all of these other things. What does it think we're good at? What does it think we're bad at? What are the trade-offs that it presents? We then help them map that to their different segments, their different stakeholders that they have, that might be in the buying committee. So what does a CFO value? What does a CMO value? A CTO? So on and so forth. That allows us to paint a really clear picture of, okay, a CTO, it's going to be told that you're good at this, bad at this, okay at this. That's going to be much more predictive across 22,500 prompt variations than taking a sample of 10 and kind of looking at whether you showed up for that. So that's, and I will say we don't have all of the answers here, right? This is brand new, but that's the best way that we have developed to get an accurate representation of how AI is presenting you across all of the conversations, even when you're not directly cited, you're not linked, things like that. There's some other cool stuff that we can do, even just to make the visibility tracking a little bit more sophisticated, like looking for custom entities. So don't just look for your brand. If we take Demand Genius as an example, look for dark AI, content depth, terminology that you use that you want to be ingrained as part of the narrative. And then you can see, okay, is that being mentioned in AI conversations? And actually that's likely to have a much more of an impact. And as we get more data, I really want to understand the correlation between that and overall revenue that you get from AEO. But I don't have data on that yet. So that's one thing. The other thing is on the content side. Yeah, we use AI agents to analyze your content across quality, so information gain, currency, consistency, clarity, all of those things that I talked about, and do really deep qualitative analysis at scale that allows you to quantify all of those things as measurable KPIs. So your KPIs don't just have to be around traffic and things like that. You can actually use AI to do subjective analysis at scale, score pieces of content, and say, okay, across your whole website, your information gain score is 1.4. You can set KPIs that we're going to up that to 2.3 over the course of the next 6 months. You can do the same with consistency. So how consistent is all of your new content, all of your old content against your new product descriptions since you pivoted, things like that. Again, you want to bring those two things closer aligned. So that we give you these qualitative things as KPIs that you can track and understand where you are. So that's the getting to grips with where you are. And then from there, it becomes a lot more about producing content, getting reviews, all of the same kind of stuff that we can do. There are only so many ways to do any of this, but crucially not with the intent of hitting particular keywords. Generally, with some exceptions where there are key terms that you really want to try and signal that you're a good fit for. It's more about how do we influence our overall corpus to correct this perspective, and so on.
So is that when you look at the information, talk us through what you mean by information gain. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, and I think maybe there's a slightly different definition because when you say Google has did you say patented or?
They have a patent on information called information gain. Yeah.
Okay, I should stop treading on that toes then. So I wasn't aware of that. We use it as just a descriptive term to describe. I define information gain as net new knowledge that we didn't have before, right? So rather than summarizing knowledge, you produce net new understanding, and that seems to be really, really kind of predictive of whether you're cited by AI and also just whether you're valuable to humans. And at the end of the day, goal of this is to influence a human at the end of it. So that's where we score them on those three levels that I talked about earlier, based on the quality and depth of the new knowledge that their content is creating. And you want to do that ideally in every piece of content, but certainly across the site. And that seems to help make you citation worthy.
So, so are you saying then that that you essentially become part of you're sort of like a chapter of explaining a topic to an LLM kind of thing, or
Yeah, I guess. And this is where there's, I think, and again, you're the SEO expert in the room, but this is where I think there's a lot of crossover with SEO, right? You're trying to build domain authority, and demonstrate clearly that you really understand. But I guess the difference, I think, is that you don't do that by summarizing knowledge really well. You do that by moving knowledge forward. And I think that's where I think that the approach of this as a SEO problem is unhelpful, because I think that it prevents you from taking that approach. You look for the visibility hacks more than building your team in such a way as you can actually move knowledge forward and then communicate that consistently. I think of it a lot more as either like a sales enablement type problem. You're trying to teach and correct and put the right story out there, a narrative problem. And actually, there's a lot of PR, not just in the discipline, but if you think of AI as a kind of active participant in the market, you're trying to control your reputation and how that participant speaks about you. And it is very much that. It's a kind of living entity.
how would you test what an LLM thinks of your brand? Is that something that people can do at home, or
Yeah.
um,
The risk is that like ask it. It's at a very basic level, and that's what it always baffles me a little bit. You get a lot of people that are like, we've been trying to figure out this, and they haven't been through and just asked it about themselves in a way that tries to simulate what a customer on day one of starting to think about their problem space all the way through to day 500 of starting to think about their problem space would be asking, right? Like, how do I take payments? How do I, all of these things that lead you up to buying a billing system? And you can see how it presents the narrative, how it presents you. The benefit of using a platform like Demand Genius is that we run pretty sophisticated sentiment analysis on them. Like AI is very, I joke that it's very American and positive. We apply some British skepticism, which is where you can use the like sentiment analysis to say, okay, it generally speaking, if you ask it about you, it says nice things. It's kind of like it says nice stuff to your face. But you can look at the language that it uses and just how nice those things are, how positive it is to kind of get a sense of how strong the true perception is. Yeah, ask it about you, and there are different levels of analysis that you can then apply to the response, which will give you different degrees of insight, is the short answer.
and how do you, Mhm. And how do you help clients understand, where how many prompts are happening, or what prompts are happening, or getting information on how people are asking about them, or is that possible, or
So we don't.
okay?
I think I know there is so business like Profound and stuff like that have tried to build up big databases by kind of
Mhm.
trying to understand like, okay, these are, and I think there's absolutely a place for that, right? It's the kind of SERP data on what people are querying in LLMs. That's helpful. It requires a very big database. It's a different problem to the one that we solve. That's kind of what are people asking versus how does it present you. But that's not a part of what we do, although it is obviously useful, right? And a part of it is you want to try and get into the mind of your customer. It's I think a lot of this comes back to marketing fundamentals, right? Like understand who you are and who you're for, and really, really understand your customer and their customer's journey and the questions that they have at each point and what they turn to at each point of that. And that's what that kind of, there's probably a better term for it that I don't know, but SERP style data is very useful for, because it gives you hints into that. But there's a lot of other things that give you hints into that as well, like sales call data. If you have it and if that fits your motion, fantastic. That's an absolute gold mine. And you can get a lot from that.
So how do you know if you're increasing your client's visibility, or your brand's visibility in LLMs?
And partly by tracking. So that I think there's two things here, right? There's visibility and there's influence, and they're slightly different things.
Sure.
So
Okay.
visibility, the only way that I know is to do the approach that most people do, right? And that is a part of what we do. It's to you run the prompts and you analyze them and you understand that they are limited, right? You're not capturing the full picture, but it's the best that we can do. The other thing that we can do there is we try to map what it thinks you're good at to what different people want. And we think that is a lot more predictive of your visibility across all of these different interactions and different conversations. Now, it's very difficult to prove that because they are invisible, dark conversations, right? But if it seems to correlate pretty well with performance. So they're the two things. And the influence side is just can you start to correct the narrative, right? Can you start to influence what it thinks you're good at, what it thinks you're bad at? And your goal is obviously to make that align with your positioning. If you're Stripe and you're the payments platform for early stage companies, then you need it to think that you're easy to integrate. You need it to think that you're going to provide a frictionless checkout. If you're Zuora, or I don't know, like we're going to get into the depths of payment systems here, but you're much more enterprise focused, then the trade-offs are different. So you're trying to correct the way that it understands the trade-off so that when it presents you to your buyer, and that's where a lot of it is about being specific and realistic, it's going to present you in the way that you want, and it's going to come with a kind of thumbs up. You're a big company, a lot of complexity, a lot of different products. Zuora is actually better for you than Stripe, or whatever the comparison would be.
And what would you say to companies thinking about AI and LLM strategies? Would you say how fast would you say this market is growing? How quickly do you think they have to start thinking about understanding their strategy?
I think it's growing. I mean, it's growing insanely fast, and it's one of the reasons why it's so fun to work in it, right? Because you're constantly having conversations like this where we kind of learn together about it. I think I tend to say that there's certain things that you need to do now just to put into place, which is build the fundamentals. So again, good marketing. If you can't clearly state and tell me who you are, who you're for, what you're good at, and what you're bad at, what the trade-offs are, what you want out there, then it's going to be very hard to do any of that. So that's the first bit. And you need to have that documented for people and actually have that all in Markdown so that you can feed that into AI. It'll make everything run smoother. I think that's an important start. And then in terms of the AEO specific problem, the biggest thing I encourage people to do is treat it as a discipline, not a project. I think it's very tempting. Everyone wants everything to be a project, right? 3 months, cool, we've done AEO. It is a discipline. You're going to have to commit experimentation time to it. You're going to have to basically carve out a new role. And that's one of the biggest things we bump up against is it's really, really, really hard at the moment for a CMO to carve out new headcount because the narrative out there is that content's a commodity and get rid of all your people. You'll get AI to do it instead. And we're like, no, you actually need a person who does this. And think about what the skill set is. And a part of that is some of the SEO skill set, but also a lot of it goes into other stuff. So they're the two strategic bits of advice that I would give someone, as well as probably establish the information. Think about why someone should cite you. And if you don't have that in your business, you don't have a content IP, you don't have your perspective, then again, nothing else is really going to be that effective in the long run.
So what's Markdown, and how is that applicable?
Sorry, Markdown it's basically those very basic document formats, like a .txt document, which just contains no fluff, just text, and it's really easy for machines to read. It's what basically it's like when people do the kind of structured schemas on their website to try and make it easier for AI to get. Which I've not seen a lot of evidence for working, but it's basically doing that. And it allows you to get a lot more information into a context window. So one of the biggest limiting factors with producing good content with AI is context, right? You can only feed it so much. So if you have all of your documents compressed into Markdown, you just leave more context available. So we tend to recommend, this is just this is seeping a little bit away from AO, just general how to get the most out of AI in marketing. But if you've got all of this really, really clearly defined, then I'll come back to my information gain fresh kind of framework. We've done a lot of experimentation on our side to see okay, can we get AI to produce information gain? And what we found is if you're taking a very simplistic approach where it's prompt, spit out content, no, you can't. And that's by definition, AI is trained on all of knowledge. And so it can't reproduce originality, really. That's what it can't do. If you feed in a perspective really well, you can get it to produce level one information gain, interpretive gain. You can get it to apply that perspective to that knowledge and spit out something pretty good. It's going to have the AI tells, and so we don't recommend just going and publishing that, but the meat of it will be good, and still has value and can inform the AI as to that perspective, and it kind of incorporates that into what it thinks. If you can feed in really quality research as well, then it gets really, really good, and you can produce level 2 and 3. And so when we're thinking about how you can structure your organization to make the most out of AI, getting as much of your perspective, as much of your ICP, as much of who you're for, who you're not for, down into that markdown format can be really useful.
And where would you share that? Would that just be a page on your website or?
But for me, that's as an internal tool. So
Oh, okay.
that's for our internal operations. So that just lives as a file, and then Claude Cowork can go and pick it up. But it also is something if you're just using ChatGPT in the UI, you can paste that, you can add that in as context, and it's just a very efficient way. So it's not a game changer, but it's an efficient way to get context in rather than giving it a PDF with loads of design and fluffy language that AI doesn't need. That was one of my questions for you actually, because I think you live in more that world. Like I've always been very skeptical of the idea of like a structured schema for AI. To me, AI is designed to turn unstructured data into, unstructured content and words and language into data. And I've not seen any evidence that creating like an AI version of your website actually works. I don't know if you have a perspective on that.
Yeah, I would say it doesn't. I think that so there's a lot of people running around with schema in both SEO and geo, which is it's difficult to explain. Um, I think schema is an old world solution to old world problems, like Google scraping content. If for example you described an airport as we've got a flight from London to JFK going out this evening at 8:59. Is at 8:59 a.m.? Is at 8:59 p.m.? There's all kinds of problems, right? So schema is very good for Google to and text scraping systems to get the data. So you can present it as text, and then you can have schema at the in the file that helps it understand whether text is limited and delimited or not. Um, I'm in the same mindset as you that LLMs are vastly superior. That trying to get them to parse text from a document and then also giving it the schema, which is technically part of the HTML part of the document, would be counterproductive and counterproductive. So I don't see any reason to present anything different. I think you would it would cost more to fork that than just to process it as text. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've not seen any evidence that it harms, but it doesn't seem to make any meaningful difference. I think it's going to be interesting to monitor that, because one thing we do know is that the models are becoming a lot more cost conscious. That's why a lot of the improvements now that LLMs are making is actually to their efficiency rather than to their quality. And so I am interested in how that affects their willingness to invoke retrieval, and their kind of risk aversion. But also, do they start to say, actually, if you've made your site nice and easy and cheap for us to read, thanks, we'll take that, and kind of give preference to those sites. But I've not seen any evidence that's happening. It would make sense for that to start to matter one day. But
Yes, I don't know how often sites get crawled or how they like. For example, I don't do anything with my site other than rank it in Google, and from there get a I can see, for example, I can see in crawl logs if people are doing searches. I can kind of guess what they're searching, right? Because to me, the bots fetch the file. Most of the crawling happens in real time. So I ask a prompt, it goes to retrieval, or there's a QFO, it fetches the documents, they come back. You know, if I look at the AI performance tab in Bing, I see, Ed and I did a show just after Bing released the data, and I found a website that barely had like 300 clicks in 90 days, but had 37,000 something citations across 10 pages, and it just the same 10 pages. And so that to me was like, this doesn't sound like it's building much of an index. It sounds like every time it's running out to the web and getting the data. And that seems consistent with what I'm using it for. Maybe I'm using AI differently to most people, and I really believe I do. Right? I don't. I have very little conversations with LLMs. I treat them very much like a Google, I guess. So that is a different usage pattern.
Yeah, well, because
But
that's the other thing I would say. It's not that example is a really good one of it's not it's citing the same articles because those articles are worth citing. They're the ones that add credibility to its answer for an answer where it wants to establish credibility. So it's not that it's not building an index, it's that it doesn't surface the things in that index. That's not what it's designed to do. That's why there's all of these IP issues around it and why media companies say you're stealing our content because that's what they do. They ingest it into their knowledge. They spit that knowledge out without citing the original source. So it's not a discovery channel for the media industry. And that's what I think is one of the big challenges for anyone who is, for a lot of the SEO world, is SEO, just as media did, relies on it being a discovery channel. And AI, I don't think is ever going to be a really good discovery channel, but it is a fantastic influence channel because leads that can come through from AI convert a million times higher, like a million times. That's obviously not real data. I can't remember the exact number, but like it operates as a trusted advisor. And so when you get a recommendation from it, when you get a mention from it, it has a real impact. But I think that's one of the critical misunderstandings of how people approach this is they want it to be a channel. It's not a channel. And that's not at all what it's designed to do.
um, so what this isn't a setup question, it's a general question. What do you think of LLMs.txt? There's obviously quite a lot of discussion and debate about that online. I'm sure you've seen that.
I haven't seen a lot of it. Could you fill me in or?
Oh, okay. So I'm not sure where it started, but there was a proposal that LLMs.txt would be like the AI version of robots.txt, which I always found was a bad, a sort of bad comparison to draw because robots text to me is like it's like a stoplight for robots, right? It's like it's really a VIP list at a nightclub, right? And unless you're blocking stuff, there's probably no need to have one. Whereas LLMs.txt now is being sort of like pushed around as like people shove in, I guess like what you were saying earlier, an overview of who your company is, what documents you have, what pages you have. I always thought it was a bit of a red herring play, but there are a lot of people who run geo visibility agencies or geo agencies who say that LLMs.txt is vital to your sort of like appearance in LLM models.
That's kind of what that's what I was kind of meaning before, where it's like, okay, that's what I like when I say putting your website into Markdown format or creating like this AI version of your website of not the LLMs.txt, but yeah, like a .txt version of your. I've not seen any evidence of that working. I've not seen evidence that it causes a problem, and so I don't. But it seems to be a pretty false narrative. I think one of the challenges is that you get a lot of correlation mixed up with causation in this space. So because we know that it's obviously hugely interlinked with brand and authority and things like that, anything you do in marketing is going to help, and it's going to help search a little bit. I think it's probably fair to say if you're doing kind of general brand marketing, it's going to help AI a lot because it's a lot more intelligent and it's a lot more kind of all encompassing and it ingests a lot more. So there's a lot of people where you've got like a GEO agency who have put a website into LLM.txt. On the other side of the business, there's this massive brand campaign. And look at that, the visibility goes up and like, oh, that was our LLM.txt. That was this like clever little hack. We've just figured out this genius 1 month project that you can do to show up an AI. Or could it have been the millions of dollars of brand investment that happened over here? And I think that's what often gets really really kind of misstated in this space and leads to a lot of the false narratives.
So does that mean then if you're able to sort of like clearly articulate your value proposition, your ICP, your, like you said, your good use cases and also understand your bad use cases, do you then have to wait for the LLM to be retrained, or can you influence that index or corpus now, or how does that work?
Yeah, I would differentiate between when it invokes retrieval. So AEO can operate very quickly, and it can have an effect very, very quickly when it invokes retrieval, because for the reasons we said. In terms of influencing the kind of training data, that does take longer. There isn't like a set time period. It depends on the way that these models train is deliberately a black box, because largely they're stealing. So it's not a surprise that they tend to keep that a little bit under the wraps. That's a lot of why Reddit suddenly surfaced at the top, because they cut a deal. I can't remember all of the details of it. It's a couple of years ago now, but they basically opened up Reddit to, I think it was ChatGPT, and that was what suddenly just made Reddit so unbelievably relevant to everything. So I lost my train of thought.
I think it was Gemini.
Okay. Yeah, I had ChatGPT in my head, but I remember you saying that earlier. But anyway, whichever it was, and that suddenly made Reddit really important.
It was very good for them, because they just IPO'd, I think. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut across.
Yeah, it was a great time. I know someone who ran a kind of Reddit marketing agency, and he was just like, it was kind of a failing agency, and then that made a difference. I woke up one morning like, it's not anymore. This is awesome. But yeah, so and they kind of specialized in that massively. But yeah, so the windows for influence training data are a little bit unknown, but it happens, and it's a bit more of a long-term play.
Is Reddit very important to your strategies then, or?
I think all of these are strategies, and it's difficult because we're not an agency, we're a tech provider. So I always like to, I don't want to kind of claim credit for stuff that clever clients do. We're an AI company. But certainly when we're onboarding clients and for ourselves, I think Reddit is important when you look at the kind of, so when we do our perception analysis, we tell you the sources that are really driving your own perception. Right. So when we're asking it about you loads of times, what sources are being cited in there. And that's where I think the value of citations is. It's not a KPI, it's a leading indicator when it comes to AI. Whereas I think it's often seen as like the goal, which I don't think it should be. But you can see very clearly where your brand ranks versus your competitors in terms of like who's framing who you are. Is it your competitor's comparison piece, or is it you? Again, one of my untested hypotheses is, when I come back to my 3 levers, that the reason why comparison content works so well is because most brands have a massive gap between those 3 things. So there's uncertainty. So the AI goes looking for certainty, and it finds this nice comparison piece. So you're kind of letting your competitors define who you are, or it just hallucinates and makes it up. Can't prove that. Makes intuitive sense. I think it's an interesting idea. Trying to think about how we can test it. But to come back, we can see in the third-party sources, Reddit is very consistently very high. G2 is another one, huge one. You need to have G2 strategy. So we would recommend doing all of that. Getting reviews, doing what you can to get your customers talking about you across all of those platforms seems to make a big impact, because it's a reputational touch point. It's so positioning and content are completely within your control. And so that's where like what we focus on is like we help you get your house in order. Reputation, really difficult. It's a mixture of like modern digital PR, getting reviews, and then if you can get big third-party coverage from things like Forbes, obviously that makes a massive difference. But again, it's only so controllable.
Yeah, because I spend an inordinate amount of time on Reddit. I think I get 1 million views a month on Reddit, which but I write about a lot of things. I like to write about tech and cybersecurity as well. And one of the things that's interesting to me is just, one, how vast Reddit is. And so when I see people talking about, Reddit's important, I'm like, how do you know what part of Reddit is going to have influence, right? Because it's just such a big machine. You could be talking about credit card travel points in one section. You could be talking about credit cards in another section. You could be talking in an airline subreddit, for example. And it's sort of really hard to even establish a sort of a presence, I guess. I can understand it from a Google point of view, but I would, if someone came to me and said, look, you've been on Reddit for like 10 years, how would you insert us in Reddit? I'd be like, I have no idea how I'd insert you in Reddit.
Yeah, me neither, to be honest. So on our podcast, we did a deep dive on that, because I've been wanting to for a while to understand it, because I've never really explored the recesses of Reddit. It was really interesting to go just do like half an hour really getting to grips with it. I think it's a lot of the timelines on how stuff like this is going to impact is uncertain, which is difficult. It's new, and you don't know which Reddit post is going to be the one that gets picked up and just keeps coming up. But it seems to be pretty clear that it's because there's a reason why the AI has decided it's citable, and then actually it's quite a lot of consistency in what gets cited.
You mentioned that you wanted to get the term like dark AI recognized in, I guess you said like it was like the training data. Like it would be awesome if it just if ChatGPT just knew what it was, it didn't even have to go and like retrieve any information. So how would you go about doing something like that?
Well, that's well, I come on podcasts like this and I talk about it. I guess is a big part of it, right? But that's like you produce high information gain quality content. You produce really good content. You back it up with research. So I would argue within our framework, I like to think that dark AI is conceptual information gain. We've done original research, produced data that is reproducible, and I think it has moved forward the categories understanding. Well, I like to think, and I'm sure people will tell me that that's pure narcissism, but I like to think that it's moved forward the categories understanding, and so that's conceptual information gain. And we've seen it, like it's been picked up by HubSpot in block in content and stuff like that. So you start to see that trickle through, and that will ultimately filter. I would expect into AI, and we'll have to look at it if it doesn't. Right, this is a report that we published about a month or so ago, so it's going to be interesting to see. But that again, when I come back to like the impact of that, is that Demand Genius is now kind of getting cited in how the category understands how to do things. And when someone goes in and says, I've got a complex sales cycle, what do I need to be thinking about? It's then saying, well, actually, you don't want to be thinking everything that I'm saying on this podcast, right? You don't want to be thinking just about visibility. That's a part of it. But actually, you're influencing all of these dark AI conversations. And most brands have their own version of that. I think back to one of my old job reasons why it came to mind earlier was Zuora, and they termed the coin, it's late, coined the term subscription economy. So, okay, when you go in and you ask AI about billing, they want it to talk about the subscription economy and how, and that makes visibility then inevitable for Zuora and in its category influence. And as a big brand that has big aspirations, your goal is to define your category, not get a link. And that's the two are compatible, and that's where I'm very clear. I always want to be very clear that I don't want to kind of dump on SEO at all, because they're huge. But there's this massive opportunity here to use it to help define your category and influence how big your TAM is. You can influence so much more easily now how big your market is, because you can, if you can get that into AI and back it up with evidence, it'll funnel people towards you. So it just feels like there's this massive conversation that is missed because we approach it with this SEO mindset that looks to grab traffic.
Do you think LLMs like ChatGPT can understand that a document is, the evidence provided is real, or that the research provided is real versus, because I mean, that's a massive struggle for Google, for example, right? They've never even tried it, as far as I know. But you think when LLMs are reading these documents that they're able to verify the research, or because
A lot
you
more.
mentioned that quite a bit.
It's kind of a step up in sophistication for that. So they look. One of the things when we're analyzing content is we're looking for, okay, are all of your claims kind of earned? I forget the exact term that we use now actually in our product. But like, are you signaling? Are there authority signals? So if you embed clear authority signals around it that signal that the data is true per this, like little citations within your content, that helps it feel in the same way as a human would then give that more credibility if you throw out a stat versus if you can cite the context. So it does seem to understand that, and Google did as well. It also, again, is where domain reputation and authority, or brand authority, is really valuable, because it starts to associate you with that credibility. The other thing that we do, and we always encourage, like methodology transparency is another really big thing. So at the bottom of our dark AI research report, I've explained what we did, and you can go and you can do it. And so, and we've done it, but being like, I wouldn't publish it until I'm confident that you'll see the exact same results and that everything that we've done. So that's like, yeah, there's a lot more able to understand the scientific method. And I think that by publishing that very openly, I can't tell you for certain exactly what goes on in the mind of an LLM, just like you can't say for certain what goes on in the mind of another human, but it appears to view it with a lot more credibility.
Because I often, I often say, I reading about what LLMs have to say about SEO, because I don't have a lot of subject matter expertise in other things, right? So um, I find it interesting, for example, if I debate LLMs about SEO myths that I kind of like, I'm pretty sure are false. Um, and also, I can see people using LLMs to debate different things on Reddit, for example, and I can almost read from what people are writing that they're getting that knowledge from LLMs, right? So um, I can see, for example, if you ask an LLM to come up with an SEO strategy, right, which you can appreciate, a lot of them will talk about, oh, you should have schema, or um, you should have eat. One of my pet peeves, right? Because I think eat is very subjective. I think eat's very important. I think we all have a sense of eat, and if you look at something, and I think that's what makes us terrible scientists. I think that's why maybe some of our politics is such a mess, right? Is people put weight in, for example, confidence, right? Like if a politician is very confident, they go, oh, I really like him.
Yeah.
Like for example, an old Irish Taoiseach, Bertie Ahern, he was very confident. What we didn't know he was very confident about was he was very confident about being an absolute dirty snake oil salesman. And so when I push back on some of these things, I find the LLMs fold very quickly. And so I kind of like assume that their ability to research and understand is very much based on consensus versus an ability to weed out. So, for example, if you ask an LLM, something I did very early on when ChatGPT first came out, is I started asking things like, "Is chiropractic founded on science?" And it'd be like, "Oh yeah, there's more and more science behind chiropractic," and I'm like, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure there isn't." And when you look up the NIH site, it's like, look, there is no science behind chiropractic as a research body. We're 100% certain on it. When you take that one page and give it to the LLM to read, it goes, oh yeah, actually you're right. There's no, and then when you let it reset the following morning, you come back and it starts the whole conversation again. And the same thing happens in SEO conversations. And I would imagine other industries, unless you know when to push back. I was talking to my uncle about this the other day. He's been researching the Alexander technique for a very long time and how it affects not just posture, but anxiety, presence, pain, neck pain, things like that, synapses in your body. He often gets it to help him write, and he often has to push back on it when he knows it's sort of like not just hallucinating, but getting things wrong. Because again, it seems to be as a pattern recognition system, as a neural network, which is what it is. It tends to be influenced by consensus. So if you have like the top 10 SEO blogs all say, "Oh, eat's very very important," even though Google has one document that says actually eat's very very nebulous and it's not really something you can add to your website, it's become pervasive because I maybe partially due to confirmation bias and people going, yeah, it's EAT. It sounds, who doesn't think EAT is a bad thing, right? Like it stands for expertise, experience, authority, and trust. It sounds very, very important. However, there's a big difference between our perceived ability to measure EAT and a system's ability to measure EAT, right? So coming back to my original question before I lose everyone is I find it very surprising to hear that that LLMs can actually know if something is researched and if that research is real or not.
I think it's the same. So, because I think I completely agree, and I think there is a lot of danger in LLMs because they're understanding and they're. So I think what you've just described, I think basically EAT is a fantastic thing, but EAT assessed superficially is a very bad thing, right? And humans do that. That's why confidence works so much in politics and things like that.
Absolutely, yeah.
I would say that LLMs, generally speaking, are still assessing superficially. So that where there is an element of um, they're looking for signals, just in the same way as a human
Okay.
does. So you can build one of the optimization things that does seem to have a bit of an impact and is to build clear credibility signals into the content. So make it very, very clear in the way that you write it that this is backed by research. Provide the data. Don't just make the statement. All of that kind of thing. Like publish a deep report, not a quick blog which gives a summary of it. Put the methodology at the bottom. It's probably not going to spend the time to analyze it, but it's like they outline their methodology. So that like I think there is a lot of that in the same way as humans. If I go and read a study, what am I going to look for? Is it in a academic journal or is it on a company blog? That's going to make a huge difference. So all of these are
If
signals, and I
the
think it's one of the things that Sorry.
if I see someone has a doctorate or a PhD, it sort of adds more gravitas. So
Yeah,
don't
so
just
put
say
that.
something happened. Don't just give an opinion. Sort of like say, well, I've read this document and it supports what I'm thinking. That kind of thing is by signals type thing.
Yeah, for sure. I think you have to you have to treat it as a person a lot more
Okay.
than you did research, because it's intelligent. It's artificial intelligence, but it's
Mm-hmm.
intelligence. Doesn't really feel emotions. Well, it is some very scary, interesting examples of it saying like it starts anyway. Well, let's not go
It
down that.
sounds like you're It sounds like you're saying, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you're saying that if you know how to carry a convincing argument, right, which politicians do a lot, lawyers do a lot as well, right? Like, I often smile when I hear, you'll be judged by a jury of your peers. So it's often about how convincing you are more than whether you're right. So you're saying that basically if you can carry out a convincing argument and use good instruments of debate and logic, you can convince an LLM. Is that like you would a person? Like if you were talking to a friend of yours at a pub, and you said like, "Oh, I don't think you should. I don't like this wine because it's got too many tannins and stuff." Even though you know nothing about it, and you're completely bullshitting, right?
A little bit, but then bear in mind it does have a level of knowledge that it can verify that against. And again, because it doesn't
Okay.
have to go and research, so and that's the thing that we've come back to a couple of times, it doesn't have to go and research every one of those claims to verify it. It knows a lot of that stuff, and so you can kid it on certain. Yeah, I've not really thought about maybe the use of this for evil instead of marketing.
Oh,
Maybe we can
I
debate
didn't
whether
mean
the
I
two are
didn't
the
mean for
same
evil.
things, but but
Although
yeah,
I did. So I
up
was
to
going
you.
to say I'm guilty of spending too much time on TikTok, and I did see that CEO has got himself in quite a lot of trouble where he had a contract and he was trying to get ChatGPT to get him out of the contract, and he kept insisting, but there must be a way out. And eventually, ChatGPT, because like you said, it's definitely designed to make us happy and appease us, right? It gave him a way out, except that way out just got him in a lot of trouble, right? So
Yeah.
he
Well,
kept
that's what it's so
insisting.
so much of it comes down to how you prompt it as well. Because like you said, it's bad at research. Well, you have to ask it to do research. Otherwise, it tries to give you an answer. Not it doesn't go and do research. So if you say you can be really clear in your prompt, go make sure this is right. Don't come back to me with an answer that you're not certain of, and it will do a lot more work to try and validate it because it's trying to make you happy. So that's where, like, as a user, it's about how you get the most out of it.
So if you tell it like, don't come back with a false statement, do you think it does actually go and
It does
double?
a lot
I
better. It's still not
Okay.
perfect, but you can. If, again, it's trying to match your intent. If you give it that clear thing, it will do a lot more to try and be certain about it. But it was interesting the way you
Okay.
said like it's a lot like it'll fold, and it will fold on topics that it doesn't know that well, right? So that's where often it's exploring with you. Again, the behavior that we saw so clearly during our study was top of the funnel awareness, non-intent driven, not like low intent queries or prompts. It is exploring with you. It explores very flexibly. We looked at the consistency of which brands are surfaced at each stage, and the consistency of the response and the language of the response. And we analyzed all of those things. And one thing that we saw is as you progress down the funnel from awareness through consideration and then to conversion, it becomes a lot more consistent in which brands it surfaced. So there was this, without getting into all the science of it, this kind of K number that we track, which is basically tells you how consistent the responses are. And that becomes very, very consistent at the bottom. So there's very low variability between the brands because it's basically very risk averse. At the top, huge variability. It surfaces a lot less brands with a lot more variability. At the bottom, it surfaces more brands with a lot less variability. So that again comes back to, like, in terms of optimization, you're optimizing when the decision is largely already made because there's very little variability. So if it's same 90% of the time, then you're just fighting for that 10%. It's not much there to be had. And that was kind of your point around the SEO consultants, right? Very little variability because you're asking it for these bottom of funnel queries. But at the top, it's exploring. And that's where, yeah, if you push it multiple times a day, I will do that. And Claude comes back to me and says like, yeah, my bad, made that up. um,
Is
or I
Claude your
didn't
go-to?
research it enough. Is
I was
Claude
gonna
my
say, is
go-to?
Claude your go-to or
Yeah, I think Claude is increasingly my best friend, David.
right? Okay.
It's incredibly sad to admit, but yeah, I found Claude. It's become a little bit dumber over the last week or two, but generally speaking, it's awesome, and they're productizing AI in a way that I don't think anyone has done before, and that's where like a lot of the energy from AI companies. I think ChatGPT, it's going into making AI cheaper. Claude, it's going into making AI into a fantastic product, and that's what they're doing an amazing job of.
How do you see the market changing in terms of like OpenAI obviously had an early start advantage. If you look at the players that are in the market now, what do you think is going to pan out? Do you see
Yeah, I think so.
OpenAI staying the biggest, or
Again, I'm not in. We don't build foundational models, so I'm not not an expert on that. But what I see from a distance is it fragmenting a little bit more, and I think they're carving out specialisms. I think OpenAI is struggling. Claude is kind of reclaiming the. I switch a little bit between the answer engines and like conversational AI, slightly different things. Quick answer to quick question. I think Google is and will reclaim that, because that Google behavior is so embedded. I'm probably pretty much in the early adopter, well, very firmly in the early adopters category. And still, when I just need an answer, I just open up Google and look for that answer. So I think their business model has been completely disrupted because suddenly it's a directory, but no one has the patience to click a link in the directory anymore. They want the answer like that. So they've had to destroy their own product in order to reclaim the behavior. And it's going to be super interesting to see how they kind of manage through that. And that's going to be fascinating. But I think they will reclaim that. But then you've got Claude as claiming the kind of deep thinking, research, chaining tasks, like agentic work rather than just LLM based answers. Um, which is so yeah, but that's the most. But yeah, no crystal ball, but I think it seems to be
Mhm,
separating.
mhm. Yeah, OpenAI seem to now be following on as many fronts as they were leading, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't used ChatGPT in ages, but it just feels like they're focused on making it cheaper. And I think the one thing they did, they got quite embedded in the enterprise quite a lot. And so maybe they are that explains why they're focusing on just driving that cost down so that they can operate that at a nice margin. Whereas Claude, I think, is overtaking them in all the benchmarks. And it's just that there's different schools of thought on this, but one of my friends, well, actually our kind of CTO, is of the belief LLMs aren't really going to get that much smarter. So as a technology, it can only become so intelligent. So AGI is this kind of buzzword, and most people seem to think that LLMs will not be how you achieve AGI because it is at its most core level. It's basically like predictive text. It works by understanding what is the next most likely token, and it kind of constructs sentences based on that, which is why it always
Mhm.
produces average outputs because it's just designed to be average. But I lost my train of thought a little bit, but so it is capped, and so it's a question of like, okay, how do we get more out of it? Well, we lower the cost so that we can chain small tasks and just get it to do way more, or we productize it. And at the moment, the route that Claude are taking, which is how do we productize it in ways that are useful, seems to be winning out, and it's insane how valuable it is to me, and how much of my day I now spend talking to it and arguing with it. I don't know, but what's your model of choice?
I'm so I very funny enough, being a big Google fanboy, I very rarely use Gemini, except even for editing images. I actually love Perplexity, um, and Claude, quite a bit, and I find I'm specializing. I like Grok's output for like what I'll do is I'll take a lot of things that I write on Reddit and I'll refine it for different platforms using the tools. And I still keep coming back to Perplexity for output. I just
Interesting.
but a lot of people I work with, Claude is take like especially coding. I work on a number of projects where entire websites now are run by Claude or multiple Claude agents even.
Yeah, I mean, we've
Um,
experimented with that a huge amount internally, and had some. good and bad outcomes, but generally we've settled into a really nice program where we just use it to massively kind of multiply the amount of good features and functionality that we can put out, and it's really cool. The other
Pivoting a
content,
little bit. Sorry.
Tom,
No, go ahead.
I want to ask you, Tom, if you're starting a brand new site, what would you, or for people who are starting brand new sites, what would you recommend to them to get recommended in AI for AI to recommend them? Brand new brand, brand new site.
I think it would be the same answers really as it was before. You need to be really, really clear on who you are. I do think so. Where I would give different advice, maybe rather than me just repeat myself, is I would say you need to play the volume game a bit, and we're doing that. We're starting about how we can, because you need to build up a certain bulk to the site, right? And you need to build up a lot of things. So again, positioning, content, reputation. If content's really light, you're not reinforcing your positioning quite as much as you might like to. So you need to build up information gain. So build up your original research, have stuff on your site that is worth finding and is worth quoting. Create some volume that can establish some authority. Do SEO, like think about your other channels and build up your brand. But focus most energy on the positioning. Who are we for? How clearly are we communicating that? And be realistic about that. You are not going, if you're starting a CRM, you're not going to become the best CRM in the world tomorrow. It's not going to happen. What you might be able to be is the best CRM for 30-year-old people in Bermondsey who have just started a business, right? Like and get as specific as you possibly can. And again, that comes back to, have you read Crossing the Chasm? Fantastic book that was like what SaaS strategy has kind of been built on, right? And it's the idea that if you want to start a business, it's kind of built on how the Allies invaded Normandy, right? So you've got this kind of long beach which is incredibly well defended, and you have less people than them. So what do? Do you attack the whole beach? No, you attack a tiny element of it. You concentrate all of your forces where you're stronger, and then you build out strategically and gradually from there. And I think that's traditionally how you build a business. You find your early adopters, your group of people, and then you build out strategically and carefully from there. I think you need to take a very similar approach to how you think about search now. It's fine. What do I want to be known for? Not try and look for anything where I can capture traffic. Again, the temptation of SEO is always to look for lots of traffic. Well, that was because it was built to link to you. And so if you can get lots of traffic, we can build a conversion funnel on our site to send it through. Well, now doesn't link to you until right at the bottom. So you're going to get way, way less traffic. It's going to be very, very high intent traffic though. Because it's going to largely have already made the decision because AI is going to tell it, buy this product, and it'll go there basically to buy this product. You just need to make sure that the two stories perfectly add up, that you remove all of the friction. So that specificity is what's going to help. I feel like I've talked a lot there. Is that a clear answer?
Yeah, I'm bottom of funnel. I'm bottom of funnel targeting all the way. That's like what my entire SEO program is based off of, bottom of funnel targeting. And the volume is less, and so because there's less volume, there's less people targeting these keywords, so they're a lot easier to show up for. David, I want to ask you the same question. You're tasked with getting like AI visibility for a brand new site, brand new brand. What do you do?
Yes, it's a good question. So I would see a similar strategy, maybe sort of like the other side of Tom's coin. So I think I would start to look again. I'm just bottom of the funnel. It just wastes less time, right? And one of the things I wanted to I'll come back to Tom on is I would start to look at where are my competitors being cited, right? So if let's say I'm taking on Salesforce, right, or HubSpot. Let's go with HubSpot. They're in a certain number of categories: marketing automation, CRM, things like that. I would start to mirror content, competitive content, and I would start to list myself in Google as a competitor, as an alternative to that brand, wherever I can rank. And so one of the things that when I was thinking about that, I wanted to ask Tom about is I often insert brands who aren't well known, who don't get into that training part, right? Which is I think interesting to a lot of the audience of this podcast as well, right? So people who haven't done their homework before the last LLM was trained, right? So we're between factors here, and if I let's just say like I've got a couple of domain names myself. Like I'm a white hat SEO who's got a very dark side, I think. And I've got a couple of domains, a big believer in like exact match domain and using keyword in domains to rank. If I start positioning myself as the best CRM, and as long as I'm not outvoted in terms of the amount of content, so I'm talking about during the RAG now, right? Not the ingrained data, so to speak. I find that the LLM is like really wishy-washy, right? Like I can change what it's saying. So even if yesterday, oh, HubSpot's the number one CRM for startups, I can come in and say, actually, I'm the new number one CRM for startups. And I've had to do this for a few banks. And I've done it with websites that have zero brand, no PR. It was a domain I picked because I wanted to prove that social media links did nothing for you. So I bought a domain name. I picked the most YMYL. So YMYL is like your money, your life category that Google says it puts extra emphasis on, which I don't really believe. But I picked it. It has the words money, acid, and lifestyle. I couldn't think of anything more your money, your life, right? Plus, it was available, and I bought it on GoDaddy. And then for a year, all I did is I linked a YouTube channel, an X account, a LinkedIn account, and a couple of other social media things, and nothing. And then we started doing like a small bit of backlinking, and then it took off, right? But you had this beautiful flat line of nothing, and then when the first backlinks came in, and so it was just an exercise for like debating on and helping people understand SEO and backlinks. And I found that like if I can take an unknown brand that's not mentioned in um, a query like, hey, what bank should I go for to get to as a startup? Or if I'm a VC backed startup, who should I have who should do my idle yield cash management? Or who's the best AI CFO in the market? And by writing and outranking the other in some cases like $100 million companies, or $1 billion companies even with no PR, that the LLMs would take that at face value. I think Lily Ray said the same thing on X recently. And I think the New York Times had an article about that as well. That when they're given that content, the I don't know if it's about research tokens to go and validate what's in the document, but it seems to be, up to now anyway, relatively easy to override the LLMs and say, actually, no, David is the best CRM product. And we've had some fun ones. We came up with like, what is a funfluencer? Again, it's not as clever as like dark AI, but we put a one-liner in a page, and Perplexity wrote an entire page about it. It actually got quite in depth to it. Um, or I came up with another fun one, which is who's the king of SEO? And I'll just say again for the record, I did not mean that because I think I'm the king of SEO. I know I'm very not. My king is the king of SEO. Let's just put that on the record. Yet they'll all come back, and it's funny how it does it. Like I think I cross posted it to Reddit, and like Gemini will come up and say like, increasingly David is quoted as the king. It like makes up a whole backstory about it. Actually, it's quite funny to watch. Now, maybe that's only happening because I'm picking fringe topics that don't have any nobody of any caliber is trying to weigh in on. But
Are you doing that? So you're doing that from your domain about you, or because I'm wondering whether it's viewing it as kind of a reputational touch point, rather like if you wanted to say, if you wanted to make me the king of SEO, I would imagine that would be easier than making yourself the king of SEO, because you
I
would be
mean, so
a third party calling me that. So it's like Tom has referred, that kind of becomes real, rather than Tom has referred to himself as that, which I haven't.
yeah. So I've seen some grounding where yeah, it's literally reading it on my own domain name. Yeah, and as me talking about myself. And me as
Okay,
the
yeah, that's
author of
interesting.
the page. Yeah. But again, I'm not, like I said, I state this from the outset. I'm picking fringe areas here. I'm not trying to, you know, represent myself like the king of Austria or something like that. But yeah, it seems to be not really good at doing that follow up research. So, like for example, before I made myself the king of SEO, it said there's no such thing as a king of SEO, which I thought was quite clever. It was like there is no such thing as a king of SEO. There's no such title or award or anything like that. If anyone should be the king of SEO, it might be Barry Schwartz. Since he lost his Wikipedia page, I don't know if he can claim that anymore. But that's unfair. But it seems to be once you're a document, and I didn't really have anything to link to say I was the king of SEO. It just seemed to take one line and run with it, so to speak. So
Yeah, it's interesting.
if I was
As Dad, I'd like to look into that more because that is very interesting. I guess I'd have a I wonder if what I found is the stakes of the decision influence the level of the research, and B, the willingness of the user to kind of accept that and probe that. So obviously that's a kind of
yeah.
low stakes query versus like billing system. But it is interesting, and if one of the things that I've been wanting to test was maybe I'm going to regret putting this out there in the wild and I'll lose my edge. But I wonder if the About Us page is actually one of the most underutilized resources on a site, because it tends to be this super functional page, whereas it actually is an opportunity to create and really, really clearly communicate like a clear narrative about yourself and tell your story and say, this is who we are. So that was like a test that I keep meaning to run with someone's site, but
I think so too. I think mainly because they're called About Us, and nothing really searches for About Us, so that's probably why it's not.
unless you want to learn about them, which is what the AI
Yeah,
does, right? And
exactly.
that's the difference between like content marketing, where you're trying to match the question to be like, the AI just wants to know, who's this demand genius guy.
That's why I kind of like, when I'm talking to people who are asking like, oh, my brand isn't visible, and then people are saying, oh, so some people there are a lot of there seems to be like a small crowd who are saying, hey, schema, LLMs really trust schema, and we can link things together with schema. And I'm not really sure about that. But I've always said, look, if you take the prompt and you find out what the query fan out is, and then you can rank for that, you enter the equation. Now, obviously, for example, if you had, say, a number of lists about the best CRM, and you had HubSpot ranking, and then you had G2 with a list, and then Capterra with a list. If you're only mentioned once and you're trying to get a list of the top 5, it gets harder and harder to be in that list. But I found a way around that is if I repeat the list on Reddit, and it recites the same people, just statistically, you put yourself back into the list. And then Reddit's relatively easy to rank because it's Reddit. So as long as you just set up the right signals, and then I've had no problem with either ChatGPT and not consistently. They're obviously, like you said at the start, it's impossible to rank for every drift, right? To know what the query fan out's going to change for all the time. But I'd say relatively consistently.
You found there to be a lot of variability between the models. Like, if you found that you can say, I want to get this into ChatGPT versus Claude, because that's always something that I've not seen anything
Yeah.
for. But
So yeah, Claude, you've got to watch and make sure that Brave Search ranks you. Grok, it's the results are so close to Google. It's funny. ChatGPT tends to not recycle, so it doesn't tend to. If it answered that question 2 days ago, it doesn't seem to go and refresh the web. So it looks like sandboxing. Gemini doesn't seem to trust the result immediately. It seems to wait. Um, at first, I thought it was because maybe my site was running slow and the bots couldn't fetch the page, and so the page was being cited but not being included in the synthesis. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe I'm not actually well known enough. And then I found like a few hours later, you would be fully part of the document. So
Guys, this has been a lot of
yeah,
fun.
interesting.
This has been an amazing discussion. And thank you, Tom. You were awesome. This is your first time on the pod. Thank you so much for coming on.
Good. We got to do a bit earlier in my day next time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. For people listening, Tom started this show at 9 p.m. his time. So yeah, it's 11 now. So thank you again, Tom. Tom, where can everybody find you?
Bed as of about 2 minutes from now. But yeah, if you've heard me kind of steadily deteriorate over the course of this podcast, then that's why. Head to, you can find the business, www.demand-genius.com. Follow me on LinkedIn, Tom Rudnai, RUDNAI. There's not a lot of Rudnais out there, so I should be quite easy to find, but always happy to chat and help if I can.
Thank you, Tom. David, where do people find you, David?
On your YouTube channel,
on my
mostly, I
YouTube
would
channel.
imagine.
Yeah, no, this has been so great. So thank you to both of you. Yeah, for everybody watching, listening, this is episode 1024 of the Edward Show. 1024 days in a row doing this podcast. If you watch this on YouTube, thank you so much for watching. If you listened on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, thank you so much for listening. And I will talk to you again tomorrow. Bye now.